Welcome, good morning. I'm just going to wait a few more moments to make sure everyone is connected here. And this time I'll remember to look to our court reporter. Ms. Cott, are you ready for us to go on the record?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, I am.
Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and get started with our introductions. Good morning. It's the morning of Wednesday, September 11th. I'm Nicole Kinsey, the presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the hearing on the pending petition for assignment of state filed application 25517, an accompanying water right application 25517X01, and the pending request for release from priority of state filed applications 25513, 25514, the unassigned portion of 25517, 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of water right application 25517X01 of Sites Project Authority. This hearing today is being conducted by Zoom teleconference, and it is being broadcast live as well on the AHO YouTube channel. If you're not planning to speak today in the hearing, I would ask that you use the YouTube channel for viewing the hearing rather than logging into the Zoom platform. Both the audio and video are being recorded, and we will post files of the recording in the FTP folder for this proceeding, and the YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. If at any time you are experiencing technical difficulties trying to communicate with us or accessing Zoom, please send an email to the site's email inbox at sites-wr-application@waterboards.ca.gov or to the AHO email inbox. AHO staff are monitoring those inboxes and can communicate with me if you are having difficulties communicating with us. As has been our practice, we will take breaks today, a mid-morning break, approximately an hour for lunch, and then a hard stop at 5 p.m. as usual. Once again, Ms. Mullen will be assisting us with exhibits and slide presentations. So if you are an attorney or a witness, you are welcome to address Ms. Mullen directly and ask her to bring up a particular exhibit or advance your slides. I would like to carry over appearances, as has been our habit in the past, but I believe we may have a few parties with us or individuals with us today who haven't previously been with us on a daily basis in the hearing. And so I wanted to look to the room and see if you would please come off mute and introduce yourselves for the court reporter. And if you would please spell your names for the court reporter, or at least make sure I see we have, make sure they're spelled correctly on the Zoom, so our court reporter can note those down. And I see Mr. Mulcahy, you are off mute and ready to go. So please, if you would introduce yourself.
Good morning, Hearing Officer Kinsey. Yeah, my name is Gary Mulcahy. That's Mulcahy. I'm the government liaison for the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, and I'm a protestant in the hearing. And I'm going to cross-examine today.
Thank you, Mr. Mulcahy. Are there others who would like to come off mute and introduce themselves who plan to participate today? I see Teresa's iPhone. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Terry Moore, representing the Che'efoca or Salt Pomo from Stony Fork, California. And I'm a protestant as well, but I don't plan on speaking unless asked.
Thank you very much. And I see Dr. Curdy. You had joined us, I believe, for the pre-hearing conference, but would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Nicole. My name is Dr. Giorgio Hattie Curti. I'm a sociocultural geographer and critical ethnographer, and I'm here at the request of the Calusa Indian Community Council. I was asked to come and listen in and speak up if there's any points of interest and concern affecting the tribe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this Wayne Mitchum, Calusa, Chairman, yeah, protested. We're also here to chime in.
Sorry, I didn't get that at all. Thank you. Repeat that, please.
Yeah, Chairman Wayne Mitchum from Calusa, protestants here to chime in as needed.
Thank you, Chairman Mitchum. And I see Mr. Laverne Bill. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so Laverne Bill, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Pascana Band of Nomalaki Indians. I'm also a protestant.
Thank you. Are there others who I missed who have joined us for the call?
Yeah, Nathan Bill, also with the Pascana Band of Nomalaki Indians, cultural monitor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. King.
So I just want to make a note that perhaps it might be helpful if your office sent the tribal parties the website password and username and password. I know that it took me a while to kind of figure out how that all worked, and that they should look in parties exhibits and then look in sites to actually see the written testimony and the exhibits that may be presented today. I just suggest that because I know that it's a lot of information, and perhaps it might help them understand better about how this proceeding may go.
Thank you, Mr. King. Yes, it's certainly my intent. I wanted to talk through today, and that probably gets us to the agenda for today. I'd like to talk through participation by some of the various members who just identified themselves and who have not been participating previously, some of which have been identified as parties, some of which I believe have not. So we need to work through that and how this participation may go. I then had, I think, two points I just wanted to raise about conversations I had that were, I won't call them ex parte, but that were not directly on the record yesterday, and I just wanted to make sure they were captured on the record, and so we'll go through those. I also wanted to mention, and I can check this off my list, that the video from yesterday we are working to transfer over to the FTP site, and I believe there may be some photos as well, so we're working to do that, although that may or may not happen while we're actually active on the Zoom call today. So it should be up by the end of the week, and that's our goal. And then once we work through all of these logistics, then we will return to panel 4, which is our water availability panel of witnesses, and we will pick up with cross-examination. So that is, and I should say that another point is any other procedural issues we need to address before we return to the panel. But that's my general layout for the morning and the day. We'll see how far we get with cross-examination today. Hopefully we can finish up panel 4. I did want to turn to those of us who joined us either as representatives from the tribes or as individuals, depending on the situation, and we'll try to see how to work through this in an appropriate way. The Winnemem Wintu tribe and the Calusa Indian Community Council have been identified as parties to this proceeding prior to this, and with party status associated with that is the opportunity to present evidence and testimony, and also to cross-examine witnesses. And I encouraged we had additional individuals associated with the tribes, various tribes, join us during the site visit, and I encouraged them to join us today so we can talk about participation and how this might work. And some of this, it was going to be an education for me, and I humbly ask for your forgiveness on how this works, on the relationships of the tribes and who is a representative of whom, so that we can get this straight for the record. I want to make sure we do this the right way. So I think maybe I'll start with Chairman Mitchum, if that works for us, and ask whether you to what extent you are associated with the Calusa Indian Community Council, whether you can explain to me whether you're representing a separate tribe or party or whether you're associated and working together. How does this, please just break it down for me.
No, I'm working solely for the Calusa Indian community. I'm the chairman for the tribe. We have sister tribes that are surrounded by us and that have been excluded from the conversation. And so the Chairman Wright from Cortina, also his name up in Grindstone? Yeah, Chairman Ron Kirk from Grindstone. You know, some of the families here have been excluded from the conversation, and so we just wanted to try to make sure that, you know, we vocalize our perspective and our concerns. But
I'm
yeah,
sorry, I'm having a hard time following. If you could maybe slow down, I'm not familiar with the names or the tribes.
If you wouldn't mind, Chairman Mitchum, if you would please, our court reporter is frantically trying to keep up. So if you would try to speak slowly, that's helpful.
I apologize. Yeah, my name is Wayne Mitchum Jr. I'm the chairman for the tribe here in Calusa. Yeah, part of our concern is that the consultation or the lack of consultation is an issue for us. You know, this is a very sensitive area to us. We're directly related to the bones that are up there on the hill. And this is a part of the concern of ours and some of our sister tribes. Yeah, yesterday in attendance was Chairman Wright from Cortina, which is one of our sister tribes to the southwest of us. And also there was a few tribal members from Grindstone, some from Stony Fort area. And these are all families who are directly related to some of these bones that are up on the hill here that we're discussing. And so, yeah, the consultation process or the lack of consultation was a concern of ours. And so we're trying to get together and, you know, to represent for our families. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, and I appreciate this. Thank you. And maybe another way of asking this is everyone, well, wouldn't be everyone. I have Terry Moore, Laverne Bill, and Nathan Bill. Are all of you associated with the Calusa Indian Community Council, or are there separate entities or tribes who are joining us?
Yeah, they're on the line if you want to. Yeah, there's Laverne there if you want to speak up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the clarification, Nicole. So I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Pasquina Band of Nomalaki Indians. So we are not associated with the Calusa Indian community, a separate tribal nation or sovereign nation. And Nathan Bill works with me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then my next question will be, so there are several, I think I identified, I'm trying to lay out how we can have an inclusive participation, and it's better to, if to the extent we can, deal with these issues up front and talk about some of these, how you would like to participate in this proceeding. One option is, of course, so the various levels. Of course, you can watch any member of the public can watch the proceeding on YouTube. The next level, as an interested person, essentially anyone can submit a written policy statement, and that will be included in the administrative record. Those policy statements aren't considered to be evidence in terms of findings of fact, but they are considered in terms of the policy preferences that are expressed in those. And those, we can talk more about it, but I'm considering all of the statements made that we heard from those who were associated with the tribes yesterday as policy statements. They're in our administrative record, and that's another level of participation. A third level of participation is to participate as a party. That is something that I would have to grant. It would be a request, and at this point, and to be granted party status as a party, you do have the opportunity to present evidence in this proceeding, testimony. Any individual who presents testimony is subject to cross-examination by the other parties. So that is something to keep in mind in this process. you're not required as a party to present evidence. The other option is for parties to participate without presenting evidence, but just by cross-examination. So with party status, you would have the opportunity to cross-examine all of the other witnesses presented and ask questions of them. We have worked through this because we've been in this hearing for a number of days at this time. There are the various groups have time limits and things like that. So we would need to incorporate in how that would work at this point in the proceeding. But I did want to understand, there are certain steps we would need to take if you were to request party status, but I did want to understand what your preference was, or your what the level at which you were seeking to participate in this proceeding, so I can help guide in that direction. So I'm looking to you, Mr. Bill, whether you, I know it's a lot of information, but what is it how do you envision participating in this proceeding?
At this time, I'm not going to be a participant, really just listening in. So hopefully that answers your question.
That's helpful. And for the record, that's my understanding at this time. The Pescano Band is not requesting party status, but will be monitoring the proceeding. And there's certainly as I said, there's opportunities to submit policy statements, to comment any draft decision that were to come out of my office. There's an opportunity for comment, for written comment, for oral comment before the board. We will keep you on the list and keep you apprised of the opportunities to speak and participate. I will certainly send as you suggested, Mr. King, I will ask my team to send credentials to the email list that I gathered during our site visit. These credentials, the way this process works, and it is explained in the hearing notice. I realize it's a long document, but the hearing notice does describe our administrative record, but every communication, every written communication, every hearing day, every motion and order and that kind of, and every exhibit submitted by the parties, including all of the written testimony, is saved on our administrative record for this proceeding. There are login credentials it's open to the public, but it's just the way to get into our FTP site where we keep all of these documents. I will ask my team to send the instructions to access the webpage, and then the login credentials, which is a ID and password. But that's where all of the testimony and hearing recordings and everything else is saved in our official administrative record. So that is a good resource for information. We also have a web page for this proceeding that is linked through the State Water Resources Control Board webpage. If you go to that webpage and then find, there's a drop down for the Administrative Hearings Office, and then you go to Water Right Permitting Proceedings, and then you go to the Site's Reservoir tab. There is some information up on that webpage. That's any official document that came out of the AHO, the notice and things like that. But if you want the complete record of the proceeding, the FTP site is the place to go for that. Mr. Mulcahy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that Ms. Moore had her hand. There you go. She was raising her hand, but she's on her phone, so I don't know if he was able to see it or not. So I just wanted to point that out.
Ms. Moore, please.
Well, I guess I should explain myself. So we're actually considered a band of Indians by the state of California so far. And we're working hard towards becoming more recognized by the state and the federal government. But we are a band. We are recognized as such. I am a member, and I am designated today to be in this meeting. My nephew teaches at Cal Poly San Luis, and he's the chairman, but he couldn't attend today. So we're very interested. Yes, it does affect our area as Stony Ford and surrounding areas. And so we want to be involved. So I guess, is that enough? And am I speaking slowly enough?
I think so. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Moore. I really appreciate it. Let me ask a follow-up, which is the same question I had for Mr. Bill. And I realize this is, it's complicated to join the proceeding like this in the middle of the current, if you will. But at this time, are you seeking party status? Is it either as an individual or representative of the band, to either present evidence or cross-examine any of the witnesses, or is your interest here to submit comments more in the framework of a policy statement as to the interests of the band?
Probably the second one. I
Okay.
don't have any evidence today, but if that changed, we can change our status or supply evidence as we find it.
It becomes increasingly difficult to do so as we get further and further along in the
Okay.
proceeding, which is why, and you can, I realize this is, we're meeting for the first time in this hearing process on the record. We have a hearing day scheduled next week. As I recall, Monday is one of them. So that may be another opportunity, but
Okay.
time is of the essence, so to speak,
Yes.
because as we move through these witnesses, it's more it's harder to go back. Although we
Yeah.
do have a significant portion of the proceeding, and I'm not just speaking to you, Ms. Moore, but to generally to those who are listening, we have a significant portion of the proceeding yet in front of us. But it is helpful for those who are seeking party status. The original deadline for requesting party status was April 15th of much earlier this year. So we would want to address those as soon as possible to incorporate everyone into the process.
Okay.
But thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for speaking up here and letting me know. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Mr. King.
So I just want just note that Miss Moore is part of the Salt, what I know as the Salt Pomo tribe, but she has her own Indian name, and the question is whether or not she knows that if she does seek party status, she does not have to participate, but it's an option, just to clarify that. But also, I just wanted to note that her tribe is the English name is Salt Pomo, so just for she I'm sure she'll follow up, and if she wants to about my comments, but I just wanted to put that out there since she's so early in this. She's just engaging this process now. So, Ms. Moore, if you want to add anything or totally ignore what I said, please do.
Officially, for the state, our documents, I believe it says Northeastern Pomo, which is the name given by the government. And in our tribal language, it's Che'efoka, which means salt people. So.
Thank you.
From Stony Ford.
Spell that name, please.
Che'e, C-H-E space E-E, new word, capital F-O-K-A-A, and I might have some of the letters. There might be extras. I will look it up. I'm driving, so I'm on Zoom through my car.
Thank you. And you're welcome if you'd like to update the spelling at any time.
I will. All right, thank you.
We'll get that to the court reporter. Mr. King, is that a residual hand or do you have more?
It's residual. My apologies.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.
Miss Kenzie?
Yes. Ms. Mertz.
Hi, this is Kate. Oh, you can see my name on the screen?
I can see your name, yes.
Oh, wonderful. I called in, so I wasn't sure. I just had a clarifying question. I was wondering if our tribal members and representatives that are here today, if they do not elect to have party status, will they be able to ask questions of the witnesses during the hearing? That's both, I guess primarily would be cross-examination questions, but I thought clarifying that point might help their decisions right now.
Well, that's a good question. Typically, no, the right to cross-examine is for parties only. Which is why I wanted to discuss this, and we don't have to finish the conversation today, but it's important we have it sooner rather than later. But I do have, as the hearing officer, I have discretion as to how we would like to do this in a way that makes sense and is fair for everyone involved. So I will say the norm is absent party status. There's no right to cross-examination. I can grant an opportunity to ask questions if that's appropriate. But that would be something I would need to consider, and we would discuss. With that, on this issue, is there anything else Mr. Hitchings, please?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I did have a question. I wasn't certain whether Chairman Wright from Cortina was on the call, or maybe he was just referenced by Mr. Bill or a different appearance today, but I didn't know whether that was also someone that had an intent to participate at some level.
I believe Chairman Wright is not on the call, and I don't believe, and anyone can correct me, that anyone is here as a representative of the Cortina tribe, which means we can't ask that question exactly at this time. Is there anyone on the call who's representing the Cortina tribe? If I have that, hopefully I have the name correct. Does that somewhat help, Mr. Hitchings? That's where we are on this.
Yes, thank you. I just wasn't sure with all the voices, and I can't see the entire screen of everyone that's on the call today. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Just want to note that the Cortina tribe, which Mr. Mitchum referenced, is also known as Quetzaldehi. And so there is, we've had in the record that tribe being identified as Quetzaldehi, but just for the clarification point, when I've referred to the Cortina tribe before, I've referred to them as Quetzaldehi.
Thank you, Mr. King. Are there any other questions for right now? And this is not the end of the conversation, but for right now, about participation or party status, or access to our record, anything like that I can help with? Then I'll move to the next item on my
Sorry,
list.
1 second, Nicole.
Yes, please.
I just need to ask a clarifying question. So bear with me because I'm going to add a little context. So last minute, I was brought into this, so I had to kind of move my schedule around. I want to be able to ask questions, but I'm not going to be able to shuffle around some of my meetings. So I'm going to be in and out of the meeting. So with that, I feel like there is going to be moments where I'm going to have questions, but I'm not going to be an active participant. So with that, if you're able to help me understand what my role should be in this, if I can't sit through the entire session, but I feel like I have concerns that I need to be that should be addressed as a participant from Pasquina.
Thank you. That is very helpful, and let's work through it. So first of all, I think because if you're planning to ask questions, you are actively participating.
Yeah.
I think the way to deal with to address that would be to request party status, but possibly for the limited purpose of asking questions. That's one of the frame it narrowly. That we are, just as a background of how we have been proceeding through this, the site's project authority has been presenting their witnesses in panels. We are today going to hear from, well, we heard introductory remarks, but going to be addressing water availability. So it's the panel that's addressing water availability in the Sacramento River, as well as Funks and Stone Corral Creek. That is the subject matter of what we're addressing today. We may get to the next panel, which I can look it up later today, which is panel 6 would be, I will say this very generally, fish impacts, potential fish impacts, and then we'll proceed there. So I think the thing to do, and then the panels proceed, and we see how much time we can get through this. And I'm speaking not just to you, Mr. Bill, but generally to lay out how this proceeding has been working. After that, we will get to panel, not today, but we will get to panel 7, which addresses terrestrial species. Panel 8, which I believe is an air quality related panel. Panel 9, which addresses, as it's laid out by the authority, tribal consultation and cultural resources. And then panel 10 is land acquisition and facilities access. Depending on your level of interest in these different matters, maybe that some panels are more interesting than others. So that's something that I can circulate or ask my team to circulate along with the FTP access the list of the panels and the order they're proceeding in as we go through the hearing. It's a little bit hard to predict when exactly they're going to be because we don't know how long cross-examination takes, so we kind of move it forward day by day. To some extent, we can order things so that if you're granted limited party status, that you would have the opportunity to ask questions. It's challenging because it's usually a lot of the times with cross-examination, someone else asks the same questions. But given your position, it may be that you're coming at this, in a way that others wouldn't have asked those similar questions anyway. So I think the thing to do at this time is in the notice that I sent to you. Well, I think we can do it. We can do it on the record, and you can follow up. To do this formally, I guess my question for you would be, Mr. Bill, are you requesting limited party status to cross-examine in the witnesses in this proceeding? And if so, are you doing it on behalf of yourself as an individual or on behalf of a tribe or another organization?
So it would be limited status based on the panel. And I would like to cross-examine. And it would be on behalf of the Pascana Band of Nomalaki Indians.
And with that, I will take that as a motion or request for party status. And I will look to the room. Are there any objections to the request for limited party status for the purposes of asking questions of the witnesses going forward? Right.
Ms. Kenzie,
Yes.
Andy Hitchings here. Yeah, we may just need to get to this as this proceeds, but to the extent that this starts to affect time estimates as well as the amount of time that's been afforded to the Sites Authority, I think we can revisit that as we proceed further, but I just want to note that if additional people are now or additional entities are now going to be participating through Cross, that does affect potentially the time that's been afforded to sites and the other parties.
Absolutely understood. Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Noted. Mr. King.
Yeah, so I support Mr. Bill's across the time that it may take for him to share his tribal perspectives, but I do appreciate the concern around efficiency. Perhaps, as in my case, he may have options to submit questions in writing that could be shared from the group or ex parte to share that perspective from a point of efficiency. But of course, I support the tribal engagement for all the parties, all the tribal parties that are now engaging this process.
Thank you, Mr. King. Are there any other comments before I act on the request? All right, with that, thank you, Mr. Bill. Your request for party status on behalf of the Pascana Band is granted. That's limited status to cross-examine the witnesses going forward. Thank you for making that request orally. What I would like to do is, if you would please, there is in the notice that I sent by email, I being not me personally, but my team, the hearing notice, there's an attachment called a notice of intent to appear. And it asks just for contact information. If you would please, for our benefit, fill out the notice of intent to appear form, or someone on behalf of the band to include your preferred contact information. We don't actually need the phone number and address is up to you, but email address is very important. That's how we communicate with each other. And to make sure that we have a written documentation that the request is on behalf of the band, as well as what we've done today. I would very much appreciate that, and we'll have that in the record.
Okay, I'll work on that right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And then in terms of, I'm sorry, we didn't get to schedule. In terms of scheduling, I will look to you for cross-examination at an appropriate time when you're available. In terms of your schedule today, when are you generally, I think it would be helpful if you didn't proceed first, because then you can see kind of how the rhythm of this proceeding is going, and that will let our ordering so far has been for the what we're calling the collective NGO parties, but it's for them to cross-examine first. And then I think maybe once we get to a breaking point after that, I can look to see if you're available, and at a point when you're in the virtual room, we can find a time for you to ask your questions. Does that work?
No, that works. Like I said, it's a little rough for me, so I have to leave, but Nathan's gonna kind of fill in for me in between there, and then I'm gonna come back. So I don't know how much activity I'll be participating in today, but I know there's other panels where I will be a little more active, especially the tribal portion, even some of the land acquisition stuff. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bill. Are there any other questions or comments before we move from these issues around participation and party status? All right, I move to my next bullet point, which is, and I'm going to look to some of the folks joining us for some help on identifying this. I did want to disclose for the record some conversations that I had, two conversations that I had yesterday to make sure that we have those. One was a very brief conversation with one of the women associated with the tribes who was not there in the morning on the first day. So when I went back to the video, I realized I didn't know her name. She spoke very eloquently about the reeds and basket making, and I believe is associated with the Calusa tribe. Can anyone help me with her name? She talked about the children running down the street.
I don't recall that portion of the conversation, but I believe that you're referring to my older sister, Melissa Mitchum Brown.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that's right. I believe I thought I recall that you referred to her as your sister. So thank you very much. I had a conversation with Ms. Mitchum Brown. She asked me as an aside whether or not this process constituted government-to-government consultation. And I explained to her from my understanding that no, this is not the unofficial government-to-government consultation process. And surrounding that is because there are these well, one, I don't think I'm in a position to have a sufficient position to engage in that type of consultation. Second, there are these restrictions or rules around adjudicative hearing processes, which mean that there are no ex parte communications. So all of our conversations are on the record. They're public. All the parties have the opportunity to hear them and participate in them. And that's an important part of the way we run these proceedings for purposes of fairness, but it does have this, it doesn't jive well, if you will, with government-to-government consultation. So I did have that conversation to explain that it is not my perspective or understanding that this proceeding in itself constitutes government-to-government. I also had, and you're going to help me, I believe as a conversation you're not on video, so I can't, but I believe Mr. Bill, and I realize that doesn't help. Is it Nathan Bill who is conducting his journey across the mountains? Or am I confusing not you, Laverne Bill, but one of the other? Is it, which one of the gentlemen was in the middle of a long hike, and I believe maybe at the top of a mountain today?
Yeah, that's Elston Bill.
Elston Bill, thank you.
Yes.
And thank you so much. I apologize that I didn't have these down. I did also have a conversation with Elston Bill at the end of the day yesterday. He expressed to me a concern, I believe, about the identification of, as I understood it, and it was loud and I didn't entirely understand, but a concern about the identification of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, the tribe. And I asked if he would raise that during the hearing process so we could have any such conversation on the record, that I wanted to make sure that conversation was not an ex parte conversation, and we did have that on the record. So I wanted to disclose that engagement that also occurred during the site visit. And with those two on the record, oh, and just as a follow-up, once again, I wanted to thank everyone's efforts for the 2 days of site visit. I know it must have been a lot of work. I think it was, from my perspective, it was extremely helpful. And I really appreciate all the efforts and the time and everyone being there. So I wanted to put that out there as well. Is there anything else that I'm forgetting before we move to substance today? Are there other procedural issues, concerns, requests?
I'm sorry, Ms. Mitchum or Ms. Kenzie, this is the court reporter. If I could have it, I think CICC, is that Mr. Mitchum? If he could change his Zoom identification to say Mitchum, because when he pops up, it just says CICC.
It's
Can't keep everybody.
Yes, we can, if that's okay with you, Chairman Mitchum, I think we can also do it on our end. So. Thank you.
I'm not opposed to it if you want to do that on your end. The CICC is the Calusa Indian Community Council. That's who I represent. So I apologize for your confusion if that doesn't help. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. It sounds like we're ready to move to water availability. So I think I will look to you, Mr. Hitchings and Mr. Ferguson, to bring up, it looks like you already have some of your panel members. We have Ms. Bizzoni and Mr. Walker.
Yes, thank you. I think both the witnesses for panel 4 are available. So I think we're ready to proceed.
And Mr. Walker and Ms. Bizzoni, do you recall taking the oath in this proceeding?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. And I will look to the room. No, I can't see the room. It's okay. Here we go. Now I will look to the room. Mr. Schutz or Mr. Busher, I'll conveniently look to you first. It's one of you planning to ask questions first. Have you worked that out?
So I think both of us have questions, but Mr. Mulcahy is going to go first.
Oh, wonderful. Mr. Mulcahy.
As long as that's still his plan.
Mr. Mulcahy, if you would like to ask questions of these witnesses, please go ahead.
Thank you, Officer Cooney. Good morning, Mr. Walker and Ms. Bizzoni. My questions are going to be directed specifically to Mr. Walker, and they're going to involve his written testimony, and the last part of it will involve his summary of his testimony. Now, Mr. Walker, could you bring up page cites 25 and page 5, please?
And that will be for Ms. Mullen on our end is doing that. So it's cites 25, page 5, please, Ms. Mullen.
And just for clarification, it should be cites 25C. There was a minor correction that was made, and that was submitted with an errata.
Thank you.
There we go. And on lines 14 to 17, you state minimum flow requirements necessary to protect public trust resources and/or avoid unreasonable impacts on fish and wildlife or other in-stream beneficial uses are not an appropriation of water. And you cite to Cal Trout Incorporated versus State Water Resources Control Board. Can you explain to me why you cited that particular site in this paragraph?
So this is specifically referring to our assumptions for the face value analysis. And for the face value analysis, like it says here, we did not include minimum in-stream flow requirements or public trust resources, exactly as it says, it's because those are not an appropriation of water.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I have that case law here in front of me. And on, excuse me, I should have got something to drink before we did this. So on page 7, paragraph 19, if we go down a bit, in here, you are again speaking about appropriation of water and beneficial uses and the relevancy of whether or not they are to be included in determining the availability of water to appropriate. On applying, let's see where, I don't have the line here. But applying proposed diversion criteria and other requirements intended to protect these uses of a water availability analysis allows for the determination of whether there is water available for appropriation. But again, you state that, however, since these criteria and other requirements are not an appropriation of water, these criteria and other requirements should only be included in analysis that evaluates the physical availability of water, not the legal availability of unappropriated water. Now, could you explain to me the difference that you mean between the physical availability of water and the legal availability of unappropriated water?
Sure. So I think, Ms. Bozzoni spoke to this on Friday, and I did a little bit as well. But although the kind of terminology seems very similar, there are some subtle differences between determining unappropriated water, which I think we would refer to, like it says here, as the legal availability of appropriated water. And that's really comparing the face value of all water rights, so all existing water rights in Sacramento Valley, to the unimpaired flow, versus determining the physical availability of water, which, this section is speaking to the historical and the calcium 2 analyses that we developed, which are considering the physical availability of water. So, whether water is available in a legal time, or in a real time situation, whether that water is available for a project.
Yeah, I kind of understand a little bit, but once you've identified unappropriated water that's available for appropriation, wouldn't it then become water available for appropriation? So then it would fall under the purview of protecting riparian uses and other beneficial uses when determining whether or not the water is available for appropriation?
So determining unappropriated water is, I'll call it a theoretical approach, because you're, again, comparing unimpaired flow to the face rights. And, in most locations in Sacramento watershed is water, or the physical water that's available is not the unimpaired flow. And most of the time, many water rights are not using their full face value of water rights. So that's where the difference between unappropriated water and physical water availability comes in.
Okay, I understand. So then one would actually be actual water, and the other one would be water that's on paper. Is that is that correct?
Yes, I think that's a fair representation.
Okay. Now, the specific unappropriated water that you're referring to, under California Water Code 1202, can you point me to which definition you're specifically referring to in this, or is it a combination of several of those issues, those classifications?
I can't say that I'm familiar with Water Code 1202 off the top of my head.
Well, Water Code 1202 defines what unappropriated water is and what would constitute the validity of unappropriated water. And so that's why I asked. So if you're not familiar with that, that's okay. We'll go on. I'm not going to try and put you on the spot here. I'm not trying to do any gotchas or anything, really. I'm just trying to understand what's written, honestly. Now, In the authority's application for water rights permit to appropriate water, did it comply with the requirements set forth in California Water Code 1260?
That might be a better question for Ms. Bozzoni, if I could kick that over to her.
I'm sorry. I would be more than happy to answer this question, but I don't know 1260 off the top of my head. To the extent that it outlines requirements of a water availability analysis, I'd like to say that we met those requirements and considered it, but I'd have to refer back to the exact language of the code, excuse me, of the code for full understanding, which we can pull that up if that's somewhere we want to take the conversation.
Yeah, I have it in front of me. I can read it for you if you'd like, or if you want them to post it on up real soon, that would be beneficial too. So which would you prefer?
I'll look to,
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'll look to my team. Are you able to, because that's not an exhibit, although it's the code is the code, we can find it. Are you able to easily pull up Water Code section 1260? I'll give a hint. The water code relative to water rights is linked on the State Water Board webpage.
I am also comfortable if Mr. Mulcahy wants to read it. I'm fine either way. I'd have to listen very carefully, but whatever works for everyone is fine with me.
I think we can do this.
Okay.
I think it probably is good for everyone. Might be something in it. It's for our future reference. We have our water code ready. There we go. This is a version.
Okay.
I think we can all agree that this is the current version of Water Code section 1260.
Yes, current through 2023. Very good. Yes.
Could Mr. Mulcahy please repeat the question? I think there's been a significant delay here.
Okay, sure.
And actually, pause for a moment. I think we need to scroll down to K. If I remember right, it's 1260 that we care about. Yes, there we go. And then Mr. Mulcahy, if you will repeat the question.
Yeah, we're also going to address J. In the authority's application for water rights permit to appropriate water, did it comply with the requirements set forth in California Water Code 1260?
But I'm reading J. So please 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the authority although J is J was, I can't think of the word I want to use. I'm so sorry. J was better dealt with, for lack of what the word I want, within the context of the environmental document, the environmental impact report. And through that process, as well as conversations with Department of Fish and Wildlife and others, I wasn't involved in the development of the bypass and minimum flow requirements, but the Wilkins Slough minimum flow requirement, as well as the Bin-Bidge pulse protection, and other considerations were developed as part of J here. And then in regard to K, I very strongly believe that the water availability analysis did demonstrate that there was a reasonable likelihood of unappropriated water, and that through the amended water availability analysis report.
Okay, thank you. And the reason why I asked this question is, one, because of the case law that was cited previously that addressed, which was Caltrout versus State Water Resource Control Board, and the hearing that, or the ruling that Mr. Walker refers to in his statement, and in conjunction with the requirement in section 1260 of the Water Code in the modeling. Was any of the information that was obtained that was available to you, Mr. Walker, or able to be obtained from the Department of Fish and Wildlife to the extent of to which any fish would be affected by appropriation and statement of any measures proposed to be taken to protect them fish? Was any of that information included in your modeling and affect the way that you addressed whether water was available for appropriation or whether there was unappropriated water? Now that's where I'm going with that.
I'm going to object as vague and compound. That was a lot of pieces to that question.
Okay, I'll start with one piece then first. Based on the information that is the Water Code section J, which states that all data and information reasonably available to the applicant, which would be sites, or that you could have obtained, sites could have obtained from the Department of Fish and Wildlife concerning the extent, if any, to which fish and wildlife would be affected by the appropriation. Was any of that information that you had available to you or that you could have obtained included in your calculations for modeling in any of your 6 scenarios that you did?
Yes, they were included in the historical analysis and each of the calcium 2 analyses. So 5 of the 6 analyses included that information.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you. Now in where are we going here? In sites 25C, page 21, summary of estimated volume and frequency of water available. Thank you. We have this this table that you presented with your 6 calculations about the availability of potential diversions in acre feet, and we can't see the far right column because of the photos on Zoom, but in those columns, you specifically state that water is available to appropriate according to your calculations there through December through June, those months, December through June, historical and face value calculations. October through June, regarding your calcium 2035 and calcium 2070 calculations. And September through June on your calcium 2 and calcium 2 alternative 4 model, with June being consistent terminus month in all models. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All these months fall somewhere in the fall, winter, and spring seasons. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay, now on page 19, in paragraph 55 of your testimony, In a monthly comparison of how delta outflow might change due to sites, reservoirs, operations, and implementation of the VAs, and that combining the change, in other words, combining sites and the VA's operations, calcium models, you conclude that at the bottom of the paragraph that relative to VA baseline conditions, the combination of the changes results in the following net change to annual delta outflow, approximately 0% in wet years, and increases of approximately 3% in above normal years, 6% in before normal years, 9% in dry years, and 4% in critical years. Net change to annual delta outflows. Where might we find a net change in delta outflow based on sites operation only?
So there's a couple locations. One would be in the environmental documents, which summarize all the calcium 2 modeling. And then we also provided it at least as monthly average or average monthly by water year type in, I believe it's AHO 48A. There's some tables with that information.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. There is so many documents up on the FTP site. It's like, where do you look? Yeah, but I appreciate that. In any of your modeling scenarios, did you consider the migration times and patterns of the Sacramento River winter run Chinook salmon, an endangered species, and the Sacramento River spring run Chinook salmon, a threatened species?
I think that question is best answered by the panel following us, which I believe is the fisheries panel.
Yeah, I understand that, but the modeling is going to determine what water is available. Am I correct? What water is available for appropriation? So in the tables that you put forth, you define what water is available for diversion in each specific 6 scenarios and their availability through the months they're available. And that water availability would affect or could affect removal of some of that fish populations. So I'm wondering if you took that. Mr. Hitchings is going to object here, so go ahead.
Mr. Mulcahy, we just need a question. So let's, there was not a clear question here, so let's.
Okay, you got it. I appreciate, I understand it. All right, I'm going to go to something else then, and I've asked what question I want. On page 7, lines 21 to 25, and footnote 3 in your testimony. Historical analysis calculates water available for appropriation, comparing historical stream gauge data to the face value of downstream water rights, including rights junior to state filed application 25-517 and export demands on the Delta, which also accounting for site-specific public pulse protection or minimum flow requirements and or other site-specific diversion criteria. Now, the footnote 3 says, as noted above, this includes all senior water rights in the demand area, including those held by the Cauchaldihi Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indians Community Center. Which water rights of the Cauchaldihi Band of Wintun did you include in your analysis?
So specifically, this is referring specifically to this historical analysis. We would have included any water right held by the Calusa Indian Community Council that's located on the Sacramento River at any location between the point of diversion at Red Bluff and Freeport.
Okay, and did you include in your calculation any other water rights, any other tribal water rights up and down the service area that you're determining?
Basically the same answer. If there was a water right located on directly on the Sacramento River from Red Bluff to Freeport, it was included in this historical analysis.
Okay, my question would be is how did you identify the water right? Was it through the State Water Resources Control Board, or was it through the federal government?
We included all water rights included on the state boards within the state board's records.
Okay, so you did not include federal tribal reserved water rights in your calculation then. Is that correct?
To the extent of whether they're I just forgot the word I wanted to use. To the extent that the state board recognizes them, we would have, but if they're not, then the answer would be no.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Winter's Doctrine? Tribal water rights?
Generally.
I'll give you a quick overview of it. Federal reserved waters on Indian reservations are governed by the Winter's Doctrine, which has evolved over more than a century in federal courts and since 1955 in state courts as well. Two landmark U.S. Supreme Court cases, Winters versus United States, 207 U.S. 564, 1908, and U.S. versus Rio Grande Dam and Irrigation Company, 174 U.S. 690, 1899.
Mr. Mulcahy, this sounds like appropriate. I am familiar with the Winters Doctrine, so I'm comfortable with this question, wherever you're going to go with this question. But this sounds like information that should be included in your closing brief. I just want to make sure we're not getting into legal arguments here. But if you do, I mean, to the extent you need to provide background for the question you have for the witness, we can do that. But let's get to your question and see what we need.
Well, my question is that under the Winters Doctrine, it states that water rights cannot be destroyed by state law or water users acting in accordance with state law. So I was wondering if you were familiar with that doctrine and understood that there were federal tribal reserved water rights that are not available for appropriation in any circumstance.
Objection, lacks foundation, calls for a legal conclusion.
I just gave you the legal foundation.
Sustained. It's Mr. Walker. Let me ask the question this way. Mr. Walker, I believe I heard you testify that you, to the extent that any tribal water rights are reflected in the records maintained by the State Water Board, you would have included those in your water availability analyses, and to the extent that they are not, you would not have included those. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And did you consider any other bases to include water rights that were not reflected in the State Water Board's records?
No.
So, Mr. Mulcahy, I think I can hand it back to you to say that Mr. Walker's testified he did not consider any such water rights in his water availability analysis.
I appreciate that, and I accept that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to turn, my last question is, it's a little one here. Turning to your summary of testimony that cites 276 on pages 8, 12, 15, 17, 18, and 20. And the reason why I include all of those because there's tables on each one of those. And you specify the difference between availability water appropriation. You show values for both TCC point of diversion and GCID point of diversion. But in each of those tables, you have a footnote attached to GCID point of diversion. That footnote reads that values presented for the GCID point of diversion do not account for potential diversions at the TCC point of diversion. Yet in those amounts that you display as water available for appropriation, despite defining that the GCID pod does not account for water that could be diverted from the TCC pod, you still concluded the full amount. Can you tell me why that was that? Wouldn't it be, would it be an overconflation of the actual value available?
Objection, vague, compound.
I had a hard time following the question, Mr. Mulcahy. Is there a specific reference that we can turn to so that we can to help orient us?
Yeah, you can, sites 276, page 8 would be fine. That's
Thank
because
you.
it's the same on 12, 15, 17, 18, and 20.
Great, thank you. That will help orient me. Sites 276. Great. Now that I'm oriented, if you would please try the question again, I think this will help.
Okay, as we see here in this table, we have the TCC pod and the GCID pod. And annual average potential diversion acre feet totals for TCCD pod and GCID pod, 183,000, 147,000, totaling 330,000 acre feet. But there's a footnote on the GCID pod that says values presented for the GCID pod do not amount to potential diversions, do not account for potential diversions at the TCC pod. Yet the totals remain the full amount of acre feet available for each one of these. Wouldn't that conflate? My question is, doesn't that conflate the total availability if there is potential diversions from the TCC pod?
Potentially, we were requested to provide availability at both locations, both with and without potential diversions. In HO 39, which is the amended water availability report, we do provide availability at the TCC point of diversion, the GCID point of diversion, and the GCID point of diversion with consideration for potential diversions at the TCC point of diversion. We chose not to include it in these summary tables, basically just to avoid having even more numbers and detail here. I think I'd also add that if you wanted to do a very simple and somewhat rough calculation, you could simply just take that GCID point of diversion average annual available number and subtract the annual average potential diversion at the TCC point of diversion, and that would give you the GCID point of diversion with potential diversions at the TCC point of diversion.
All right. I appreciate that, and that's all I have. And thank you for your time, and thank you for the opportunity to post some questions.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mulcahy. With that, I will look again to the room. Mr. Schutz or Mr. Busher, which of you is up next?
I think I don't have a lot, so perhaps it would be efficient if I went next, if that's okay with Mr. Busher.
Absolutely.
Mr. Schutz, to you.
Good morning, Mr. Walker. Good morning again, Ms. Bozzoni. Nice to see you. My questions this morning are for Mr. Walker, whom I met in other venues in life, and it's nice to see you too, Mr. Walker.
Good to see you.
I want to start with the historical analysis. Mr. Walker, on page 8 of your testimony, you identify AHO 045 as a tool you use to perform what you called the historical analysis. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And on page 18 of your testimony, you identify exhibit AHO 49 as a tool you use to perform the voluntary agreement analysis. Is that also correct?
Yes, I believe it's HO 49B.
Okay, and can you explain the difference between AHO 49, was it B or D? I didn't catch that.
B as in boy.
B as in boy. And that's one of the, why don't you break down what all of AHO 49 is and why there's a B?
So HO 49B is the spreadsheet tool that was included in the authority's voluntary agreement analysis submission. It's essentially a copy of the site's historical water availability tool, which is AHO 45, just with the addition of the voluntary agreement analyses. As it relates to the historical water availability analysis portion of that tool, it's identical. I believe there's just one change to one of the input assumptions.
And can you describe what that change was, please?
I believe it was turning off the face value water right demands, which thereby allowed for potentially greater water availability volumes and potentially greater potential diversion estimates.
I see. So other than that, those tools, basically AHO 49 folds in AHO 45, and then adds other elements. There's not a difference in the calculations that are made within the two tools about historical analysis. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great, thank you. I didn't understand that. And sometimes, isn't it true that sometimes when there are versions of different models, there's a little README tab at the front that explains what has happened to something? And there aren't any of those README tabs in these two tools, are there?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to ask some questions about the analysis you did regarding a percent of unimpaired flow alternative that you were asked to do by the State Water Board. And I did have some trouble following the different descriptions and modeling analyses you did. And so I'm going to try to see if we can clarify that. You used, on the one hand, and you identify this, I believe it's on page 15 of your testimony, as the tool using the Division of Water Rights water availability tool, correct?
Could we pull up the specific reference you're referring to?
Sure, page 15 and starting at line 4.
And would you mind repeating the question?
Just as an introductory question, you used a tool, you describe here, do you not, that you used a tool provided by the Division of Water Rights that you call the Divisions tool to perform an analysis, correct?
Yes.
And you expressed some concerns with that tool. And those concerns are laid out in a separate exhibit. And I'm struggling to find what the number of that was. AHO 40, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you write AHO 40 or did someone else write that exhibit?
I believe that's the memo we prepared. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes, I was one of the primary authors of that.
Okay. So can you summarize on pages, you refer to pages 4 and 5 in your testimony, you refer to pages 4 and 5 of AHO 40. Can you summarize your concerns with the divisions tool? Let's just start with that. And if that's too broad, we can narrow it down.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Could we pull up AHO 40 just so I could maybe very briefly remind myself exactly what's in those pages and paragraphs noted?
And I think we're going to pages 4 and 5. Is that?
Yeah, I think the bottom of page 4 and the top of page 5. It's a little too dense even for me.
Okay, and Ms. Mullen, would you mind scrolling down a little bit to page 5? A little bit further, please. Okay, and Mr. Schutz, you asked if I could provide a summary of our concerns. Was that the question?
Yes, as you've described them on these pages.
Sure. So I think we kind of break it down into 2 groups. So there's some, I guess, policy issues that we start describing, and that's the issue of really trying to determine what is the answer the divisions tool was trying to respond to, or excuse me, not the answer, the question the divisions tool was trying to answer. I think both myself and Ms. Bozzoni spoke to this on Friday that, seemed to be trying to answer both questions of is unappropriated water available and is water available for appropriation with the same tool, which in our point of view is very difficult, if not impossible, to answer those questions at the same time with the same tool. We also had some concerns about if you are trying to answer the availability of unappropriated water, what the appropriateness of including in-stream flow requirements, such as the unimpaired flow requirement or the bin bridge, pulse protection, or Wilkins Loop bypass flow requirement. On the technical side, I spoke a little bit to some of the concerns we have with how the face value demands were developed in the water right face value database used in this tool. We had some concerns whether duplicative or overlapping rights were not accounted for. We also had some issues or some concerns with how some of the geographic disaggregation occurred, specifically in the watershed from the Sacramento River at Bend Bridge upstream. Ms. Mullen, could you scroll down a little bit further, make sure I didn't forget anything? And maybe if we could even go to the next page, I believe. And just a tiny bit further, please. Okay, and yeah, and then lastly, kind of again circling back to, kind of the policy or philosophical point of view, the divisions tool include assumptions for return flows, which, again, depending on the type of question we're trying to answer, the type of analysis trying to be performed, there was some concern whether it's appropriate to include return flows or not.
Thank you. I think that's a good summary. So is it your view that an analysis that includes minimum in-stream flow requirements or other constraints designed to protect in-stream uses is really appropriate for an analysis of water available for appropriation, but not for an analysis of unappropriated water? Is that kind of one of the policy distinctions you're getting to?
Yes.
Okay. And so part of your technical concern is that the analysis sort of that comes out of the tool that you were given, kind of conflates some of those elements. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So did you perform an analysis with what you considered a better tool of a 55% of unimpaired flow requirement? And I'll just generally, let's ask that, and then we'll break it down.
So I think with each of the analyses we've performed, including the analysis with the divisions tool, we really avoid saying one is better, because each have their strengths and their weaknesses, and each, essentially are answering different questions. And even if there's some concerns with the division tool, I think there's still, some value in the answer that it provides. But the analysis that we completed that you referred to with the alternative form model, that provides an answer as well. And both demonstrate that water is available for appropriation.
Okay. But when you're looking at those different tools, each provides a different answer as far as how much water is available for appropriation, correct? As opposed to unappropriated water.
Potentially, yes, at least to some degree.
Okay. But you just said you don't like to say, I don't recall the exact words you used. You said that each tool has some value, but you did not support, I believe your testimony says, does it not, that you did not support the use of the divisions tool because of technical concerns you had with it. Is that correct?
I believe we said we did not endorse the results or the tool itself.
Okay, thank you. Is there somewhere a sort of side-by-side comparison of the different amounts of water available appropriation that you developed for the sites authority using the different tools that you employed? And I'm not asking about available water. I'm not asking about unappropriated water. I'm asking about water available for appropriation. Is there like a table somewhere that shows the different results of the different modeling exercises?
In my testimony, there's table 2, which I believe is on the last page of my testimony, my written testimony.
There, and we could turn to that. I see that. And in the calcium 2 alternative 4 model, that analyzes that analysis is specifically for a percent of unimpaired flow analysis that you did. Is that correct?
Yes, the alternative 4 model includes a representation of the 55% unimpaired flow requirement.
And was that percent of unimpaired flow requirement that you did there modeled for 55% of delta outflow, or was it modeled for 55% of the unimpaired flow at the points of diversion, or both?
So maybe I'll clarify, we did not develop this model. This was developed by the Bureau of Reclamation as part of the 2019 reconsultation efforts. We took the results from the model and post-processed them.
And again, my question is, when you did then your post-processing, what were the constraints that you used to do your post-processing? Percent of delta outflow or percent of flow at the points of diversion, or both?
So that model includes unimpaired flow requirements on all the major tributaries, and any water that's basically bypassed from the upstream reservoirs to meet that requirement is protected in the model through delta outflow. And when we did the post-processing, we made sure to ensure that that water that was being protected in the model was also being protected. So I think the short answer to your question is yes, we did it both points of diversions. I believe, if I remember correctly, at a couple downstream locations, and then also delta outflow.
I see, thank you. And did those constraints that you post-processed also include the site's proposed constraints of 10,700 CFS at Wilkins Slough, the pulse protections, etc., or were those left out of the analysis and the unimpaired flow was the only constraint?
So we kept the delta excess requirement and we kept the Wilkins Slough bypass criteria, but we did not include the Bend Bridge pulse protection criteria under the assumption that that criteria is, primarily to protect portions of the natural hydrograph, which the unimpaired flow requirement is also aiming to achieve. So we did not include that criteria, but all other criteria were included, or criteria or requirements, I should say, were included.
All right, thank you. That's helpful to understand. In your testimony, you on page 19, in lines 14 to 18, you talk about the relative to the baseline condition, what do you call the VA baseline condition? You give figures for the net change from sites diversions to delta outflow. Do you recall that?
Yes.
So the VA baseline conditions presumably would be the flows that were modeled under the voluntary agreements without considering sites. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So you compare here the percent of change of total delta outflow. You're aware, are you, that are you not, that the voluntary agreements purport to add flow to the existing outflow requirements that exist under a baseline condition today?
That's my understanding.
You don't analyze the percent of change. Well, let's put it this way. You don't make a comparison, do you, between the amount of water that sites would divert and the amount of water that the voluntary agreements would purport to add, do you?
I'm not sure that I quite understand the question.
All right, let's review. You analyze the difference on a percentage basis between the flows that would delta outflow under the VAs without sites and delta flow under the VAs with sites diversions, correct?
Not exactly. We combined the difference in delta outflow from a model with sites with the difference in delta outflow from the VA model.
Okay. But you didn't make a direct comparison between how much of the voluntary agreement additions would be reduced by the sites diversions, did you?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Are you referring to the VA additions? Is that Mr. Hitchings?
Yes, I believe the question was framed in a way that that's what would occur. That there would be a reduction in those VA contributions.
Mr. Walker, the sites diversions would reduce the flow in the Sacramento River, correct?
At times, yes.
And if the VAs were put in place, the sites diversions under that situation would also reduce the flow in the Sacramento River, correct?
At times, well, actually, I think I'd probably say it's unlikely because my understanding is the VA contributions and VA flow assets for the Sacramento River are to be utilized in April and May or in the summer months, depending on Shasta storage conditions.
Okay, let me rephrase. On a net annual outflow basis, the diversions to sites would reduce the delta outflow if the VAs were put into effect. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. My question before was, you did not make a comparison between the difference between existing delta outflow under existing conditions and delta outflow under the VAs on the one hand, and the changes that would occur under to delta to the changes that would occur and the amount of change between delta outflow under the VAs and the and without the VAs as compared to the amount of water diverted by sites on an annual basis.
Objection, vague, compound.
I think that's a fair objection, Mr. Schutz. I know you might, it's a hard question.
It's a hard question, and when you compare the difference between delta outflow under the VAs and delta outflow under without the VAs, you get an answer. You can show that as an answer in acre feet, say on a water year type average basis. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you look at the change in delta outflow with and without the site's diversions, you can get on a water year type basis, average water year type basis, you can get answers for that in acre feet, can you not?
Yes.
Did you make a comparison between those two acre foot values?
Are you asking in the sense that one, say, is a percentage of another, or?
Simply as a percentage of one another, or as a total acre foot on a water year type average annual basis?
So we provided the combination of those two numbers to produce this net change. So I would say in an acre foot volume, yes, in terms of a percentage, not explicitly, but I believe all the numbers to do such a calculation would be included in HO 48A.
Thank you, and I agree with that. But you didn't call those numbers out specifically, did you?
Which numbers?
The numbers for the calculation that you just described.
Yes, they're included in tables in HO 48A.
Thank you. If you give me a second, I think that concludes my questions, but I want to make sure. I think that's it, Ms. Kenzie. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Wong.
Thank you.
And let's go ahead and take our morning break. We'll take 10 minutes. We'll come back I'll make it 10:54. See you then. Welcome back. I will look to our court reporter. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
I'm here. Thank you.
Great. And I see Mr. Busher. So with that, Mr. Busher, if you have questions for these witnesses, please go ahead. Oh, Ms. Bizzoni. We can't, I see. It's an audio problem. You're all. Let me know if you want me to speak again. Can you hear me?
Oh, there we are. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I'm good now.
All right, great. Mr. Busher, to you.
Thank you very much, Officer Kinsey. Good morning again, Ms. Bizzoni. And good morning, Mr. Walker. My name's Eric Busher. I'm an attorney at San Francisco Baykeeper, one of the protesting parties in this case. Ms. Bizzoni, I'm going to start with your testimony, and if we could pull up cites 259 at page 28. I think that's your summary that you gave us on Friday. I have a couple questions there. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. Mr. Walker talked a little bit about this morning in terms of the two different questions you're answering, being unappropriated water versus water available for appropriation. For water to be available overall, does the answer to both of those questions need to be yes?
I think that we would look at all of the answers simultaneously. So yes, there does need to be unappropriated water, and there does need to be water available for appropriation. I think, though, we need to look at it as a whole.
So let me try it this way. If, as a whole, looking at the analysis that you and Mr. Walker performed and have testified about, the answer to the first question, is there unappropriated water available, is no. Does that kind of end the inquiry on availability? Does it
We
then
have
matter?
answered that question, yes. So I haven't thought of that exact scenario where that question has been answered with a no. But there does need to be unappropriated water.
Okay. So if the answer to either, right, for a specific project or for a specific time period, if the answer to either of these two questions here is no, right, then there is not water available.
I believe that the time period needs to be looked at on I don't believe it applies to time period necessarily. I think that time period needs to be assessed more about if there's water available for appropriation.
So my understanding is that CITES does not seek to divert any water or to appropriate any water between mid-June and the end of August, correct?
Correct. That is when the Sacramento watershed has been identified as fully appropriated by the State Water Board.
Correct. And when you say identified as fully appropriated, that means the answer to is there unappropriated water available is no, right?
That's correct. They have made that finding.
Okay. And so because there is no unappropriated water available, there is no water available. CITES doesn't seek to use or to appropriate water during that time period, right?
Correct, during the time frame defined by the state board in previous findings.
Okay. And then I guess the inverse of the last set of questions, right? If the conclusion is there is unappropriated water available, but there is no water available for appropriation, is water available in that circumstance?
Water available for appropriation, I view this as, although we can look at it through a historical lens, as also a real-time question. So this, I think, is really demonstrated by times of curtailment. There are times when there is not water available for appropriation, even under existing water rights, when those curtailments are in place. And so, yes, there are absolutely times where maybe there's unappropriated water available under a wet scenario, but it's not available for appropriation under a dry scenario.
Okay, so let me try this one other way then, right? I mean, we could make a little like 2x2 matrix here, right? Is unappropriated water available? Yes, no, right? Is water available for appropriation? Yes, no. I take it your opinion is the answer to both of those questions is yes, and so we're in that one box of those four, correct?
Correct.
Okay, if we're in any of those other three boxes, where we either have, yes, no, no, yes, or no, no, is water available?
If we're looking at the proposed season as a whole, yes.
What does that mean? I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
So we're in this instance, we're talking about September 1 through June 14th. And our analysis has identified there's unappropriated water available and that there's water available for the appropriation. So our answers are yes to both of those. Now, if we looked at a scenario and there was no unappropriated water across that entire season, that would be a no. And I think that would be kind of a done deal in the terms of we wouldn't be able to say there's unappropriated water available to supply the applicant.
Okay, and so you said during that entire season, why is it different in terms of the water availability, your opinion about water availability, if there is no unappropriated water for just a portion of that September through June season, as opposed to for the whole thing?
When we're looking at the unappropriated water, it's an extremely theoretical analysis. We're looking at unimpaired flows, as Mr. Walker described, and we're looking at the full face value of in the Sacramento River watershed of over 8,000 water rights. So there's a lot of room for interpretation of those results, I'd say, on a monthly basis. I definitely don't feel there's one perfect way to really get to this unappropriated answer or question, unappropriated water question. And when we look at this through the concept of the permit to then license process, we know that the state board has thoroughly looked at the June 15th through August 30th dates and said this is fully appropriated. Beyond that, we can look at that season where there has not been that thorough analysis and finding. And given a permit that allows for diversion during that time, if there's never actually an opportunity to appropriate water on a given date, then when we go to the license, we would be limited further than what the permit states. So from my perspective, when we're looking at an extremely theoretical unappropriated water analysis, we should look to those thorough findings that have already been made. And then the permit process really allows for the next step.
Did I understand your testimony correctly that the modeling analysis that was performed by sites as to the first question here of unappropriated water available is just the face value analysis? The rest of those answer the second question?
That's correct.
Okay. Is it correct that the face value analysis shows that there is not water available? I'm sorry. Let me start over. Is it correct that the face value analysis shows that there is only unappropriated water available between from December to June?
Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. And yes, I believe that is the in Mr. Walker's summary table. Those are the correct months.
So there is no unappropriated water available in September, October, or November, according to that analysis, correct?
Based on our face value analysis, that is correct.
And the face value analysis is the only analysis as to whether there is unappropriated water available that sites performed, correct?
It is also considered in the results from the divisions tool. However, I guess sites didn't, we ran that tool, but we did not develop and perform that tool, I guess.
And you've disavowed that reliance on that tool, correct?
No, I don't think that, did you say disavowed? I don't think we would say it that strongly. We did not develop that tool, and division staff put, a lot of effort into that tool quickly, and there wasn't much back and forth. And we didn't feel we could endorse the responses because we did not have, quite honestly, the time or the input.
And the divisions tool also shows that there is no water available, no unappropriated water available in September, and then with the post-processing in September and October, correct?
I would need that up to confirm those dates. I apologize.
Oh, fair. That's fair enough. It's in Mr. Walker's testimony, and
Yes.
I'll ask him about it. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Ms. Bizzoni. I think that's all the questions I have for you. Mr. Walker, I want to just follow up on one thing you said to Mr. Mulcahy. You were talking about doing the analysis of both points of diversion and then offsetting or not offsetting the various diversions. You said we were requested to provide that analysis. Who made that request?
State board staff.
And did you try to comply with it?
Yes.
Do you think you did?
To my understanding, yes.
And then if I want to, I had a couple other questions about your testimony to Mr. Schutz about AHO Exhibit 40. And if we could go to page 6 of that document, this moment, please. And if we could scroll down to see the results paragraph. Thank you. Mr. Walker, in the middle of that paragraph, right after the footnote, you see the sentence that starts, "It is the authority's opinion."
Yes.
Okay. So first, I understood your testimony this morning to be that when you included constraints on the model that was developed by the Bureau of Reclamation, you included the Wilkins Slough minimum flow requirement in those constraints on sites operations. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. But you did not include the bend bridge pulse protection criteria, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can you explain for me the basis for the authority's opinion that under a 55% unimpaired flow Bay Delta plan, additional bypass or minimum flow requirements may not be required?
I think, as I spoke with Mr. Schutz about for the bent bridge pulse criteria, our understanding is that is to protect, portions of the natural hydrograph, which also our understanding the 55% of unimpaired flow requirement is intended to accomplish. The Wilkins Slough minimum flow requirement is maybe not as much of a straight answer, but if you'll note in this memo, we provided results where we included the post-processing for those requirements, and then results where we did not include the post-processing.
And those are the results that were displayed in your summary presentation, correct?
Relative to the divisions tool?
Yes.
So maybe just to clarify, essentially we did not provide the results for this scenario specifically that includes the bypass flow requirements and the minimum flow requirement. In my written testimony and summary presentation, we provided the results without the post-processing, and then we provided results with a second scenario that includes the post-processing, but also includes state filed applications and pending applications in the water right demand data set.
You said that both the 55% unimpaired flow requirement and the pulse protection are designed to accomplish the same goal of protecting a portion of the natural hydrograph. Did you do any modeling for how often, right, the 55% unimpaired flow requirement actually would protect the flows that are protected by the pulse protection?
In terms of comparing, say, the frequency of those?
Correct. How often does 55% protect those flows that are protected under the pulse protection requirement?
No, we did not.
And did you do any modeling for how often 55% means that flows are in excess of the diversion limit at Wilkins Slough?
For this analysis with the divisions tool, not explicitly. For the analysis that we completed with the alternative 4 model, if you remember, we kept the Wilkins Slough requirement in there as an additional layer of conservatism. So that analysis, keeps that requirement. So the results from that analysis would be reflective of including that requirement.
All right, thank you. We can take this document down. That was the question I had here. Mr. Walker, in your written testimony, which is cites 25, you describe 5 points of analysis in the face value analysis section. And I'm looking at paragraph 15 if you want to see that. The last point of analysis you describe is the delta. Can you be more specific as to where that is or what you're analyzing with respect to the delta?
Excuse me, could we pull that up, that section? Looks like it's pages 5 and 6 of 25C.
Yeah. They're at line 24.
So specifically relative to the face value analysis, we have the point of the Sacramento River at Freeport, and the delta would include essentially the legal delta, so everything downstream from Freeport through into the Sacramento Bay.
I mean, is that like that would intend to take into account appropriations of water in the delta?
Correct.
And then if we go down to page 8, paragraph 21, that first sentence there, Mr. Walker, if you can take a look at that, and the same question as to what the delta refers to there.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the lines again?
The first sentence in paragraph 21, lines 5 through 8.
So for the historical analysis, I would say it essentially includes the same location, basically the legal delta downstream of Freeport.
Does the historical analysis, well, can you describe the regulatory in-stream flow requirements that are analyzed in the historical analysis?
So the historical analysis includes all D1641 flow and water quality requirements, and we do a check of how much water is available above each of those requirements, as well as including water available relative to Fall X2 requirement in the biological opinions.
Okay. Anything else?
From a regulatory perspective, no.
I want to turn now to the alternative for unimpaired flow analysis that's in your testimony. On Friday, during your presentation, you said that sites is, quote, prepared to meet the state board's request for an analysis of unavailability with a 55% unimpaired flow requirement. Is it your opinion that sites has already provided that analysis, or that it would do so in the future?
Our position is that we've satisfied that request with the inclusion of the alternative 4 model results.
Okay. So in your testimony in paragraph 38, and as well as in your presentation on Friday, you described that the alternative 4 includes an unimpaired flow requirement that is similar to that proposed by the state board. Can you explain to me what the differences are between the 55% unimpaired flow requirement that would be as part of the proposed update to the Bay Delta plan and the alternative 4 model?
Sure, I'll do my best. So the way in which the requirement was modeled in this calcium 2 model is largely focused on effects to the CVP and SWP system. No surprises that that's largely what calcium 2 is developed around. So it does lack some of the granularity relative to individual water right holders. At the time or yeah, when this model was developed, some of the details around maybe particular things like cold water pool protection, some of the specific maybe delta requirements that may be included in the 55% unimpaired flow requirement were not included. So there's some surrogate actions developed in the alternative 4 model to approximate or account for those.
And when you say there's surrogate actions to account for those, what do you mean?
I think I'd kind of, or I'd basically say, or repeat what I just said, that some of the specific objectives like cold water pool, some of the maybe in delta requirements related to like OMR requirements or things like that, or at that time we're at kind of the narrative level of description and development. So the reclamation staff that developed this model, came up with surrogate actions to try to approximate what those might look like, given the lack of definitive requirements or objectives available.
So that's helpful. Thank you. Those are things that Reclamation did before sites got its hands on the model when you're describing those actions.
Yes. And I think I'll repeat, as I said before, we did not develop this model or make any adjustments to it. We simply took the results from this model and post-processed it.
You said on Friday that there is not, or there was not, a model does not exist, sorry, that includes both sites operations and a 55% unimpaired flow as proposed in the Bay Delta plan. Does the division's water availability analysis model include those?
The division's or tool is a water availability tool, which does include or is attempting to calculate the water available at sites level of seniority. And within that calculation, it does layer in a 55% unimpaired flow requirement.
Okay. So there's at least one model that does include both of those things, correct? One tool?
Yes. Probably the short answer, yes.
And I want to set aside the alternative 4 analysis that you just talked about. I have more questions about that. Other than that analysis, did you do anything to try to create a tool or a model that encompassed both 55% unimpaired flow as proposed for the Bay Delta plan and sites operations?
No, we again relied on the post-processing of the alternative 4 model.
Is it possible to create a model that would have done that?
At the time, prior to submission of the application and the water availability analysis, no.
Would it be now?
Possibly.
What changed?
Additional information from the state board on more specific requirements and details of how the unimpaired flow requirement might be implemented and operated to, although I'll say that there's still a lot of uncertainty there.
Did anything change in terms of the modeling tools available that would now allow for a creation of a model that would include both of those requirements, or just more information about what the state board may do?
When you say modeling tools, are you referring to something specific?
I'm not the expert here on the modeling side. I'm trying to figure out, right? You told me that at the time the application was submitted, it would not have been possible to model both 55% unimpaired flow in an updated Bay Delta plan and sites operations, but that now it would be possible. I want to know if that changes. You said it was more information from the state board about how to implement 55%. Is there anything else or anything about the modeling tools that changed that now makes that analysis possible?
I think to clarify, I would say it's potentially possible to do that now. In terms of the modeling tools, I suppose there's SACWAM models available now, although again, there's still a lot of uncertainty around that model and some concerns with its representations of the system.
Sorry, what kind of model? SAGWA? Is that what you said?
SACWAM, so SACWAM.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker, is it correct that your understanding of the 55% unimpaired flow that would be required in the Bay Delta plan is delta inflow and or outflow?
I believe so, yes.
And do you have an understanding for the approximate area, watershed area for calculating, the total unimpaired flow that would occur as part of that update?
Generally, yes, although, and I can't say that I've reviewed recent documentation, but my understanding is there's still some uncertainty as to exactly how that would be accomplished.
Generally correct to say that the total unimpaired flow, and when we're talking about a 55% update to the Bay Delta plan, would be, right, the Sacramento River and its tributaries, right, the Feather, the American, as well as some Delta direct tributaries, correct?
I believe so, yes.
With respect, in paragraph 38 here, you refer to the long-term operations and the alternative 4 model. What is the 55% unimpaired flow requirement in that model?
55% of unimpaired flow requirement.
Of what? Is it the same as a Bay Delta plan? Is it delta outflow? Is it at a specific location? What 55% of what?
It's defined at several locations throughout the watershed, and then water that's present to meet that requirement or bypass to meet that requirement at those locations is protected through delta outflow.
Ms. Mullen, can we put, got a new exhibit that we've sent in to Ms. Mullen as Baykeeper 126. We could put the first page of that on the screen, please.
We have it. We're just trying to get it in the right place to pull it up.
I understand and truly appreciate all of the behind the scenes work Ms. Mullen is doing. So thank you. Okay. So Mr. Walker, this is a copy from the final environmental impact statement published by the Bureau of Reclamation for the long-term operations of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project in 2019. And this is the Alternatives Development Technical Memorandum. Have you seen this document before?
I believe so. I can't say with 100% certainty, though.
You agree that this is the Bureau's 2019, well, you used the Bureau's 2019 alternative 4 model that comes from this document, correct?
I'm not trying to be difficult, but I don't see a date or anything here. So
Oh, fair enough. I'm sorry. I think it's on the bottom of the first page.
Yes, it appears so.
Ms. Mullen, can we go to PDF page 30? And zoom in on that top right box that's highlighted. In the column that shows alternative 4 there, this is the Sacramento River requirement, has a minimum of 55% of unimpaired flow at Red Bluff. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then it says it's reduced during Shasta critical years. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that the same 55% requirement that you used in modeling to meet the state board's request?
Yes, since this is the requirement that was modeled in the alternative 4 and we post-processed alternative 4, that is.
And do you agree that the model that was used here for alternative 4 does not meet the 55% flow objective at Red Bluff in all conditions?
Yes. There was times where an off-ramp is allowed, but my understanding that those off-ramps were largely put in place to protect cold water pool and, you know, in the intent of the narrative objective in previous state board documents that included a narrative objective as part of an update to the water quality control plan.
And the off-ramp, as you call it, is it accurate to say that that is expected to occur in approximately 10% of years?
I don't remember, I'm sorry.
Ms. Mullen, can we go to page 134 of this document, please? Scroll down right there. Mr. Walker, in the paragraph here on the upper Sacramento River, the last sentence, during Shasta critical years. Do you see that sentence?
Yes.
The model results show that this occurs in about 10% of years. Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Did you So you described how you post-processed. Well, actually, let me ask one more question before we get there. Did you do anything in the model to translate how often 55% of unimpaired flow at Red Bluff is the same or more or less than, right, 55% of unimpaired flow in terms of delta outflow?
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
So the model here uses 55% of flow of unimpaired flow at Red Bluff as a target and says in about 10% of years we wouldn't hit that target, but that's the target. My question is, how often does 55% of unimpaired flow at Red Bluff mean the same thing in terms of, right, total unimpaired flow, 55% unimpaired delta outflow?
So as I think we talked a little bit about before, there's not an explicit, say, 55% delta outflow requirement. At each of the locations in the model where there is a 55% target, the water that's either released or bypassed or foregone diversion to satisfy that requirement is protected through delta outflow.
So where are the locations in the model other than Red Bluff where there is a 55% requirement in this alternative 4 model?
I believe, if I recall correctly, there's one at Clear Creek relative to Whiskeytown operations. There's one further down on the Sacramento River, I believe just upstream of the Feather. There's a requirement on the Feather River and a requirement on the American River.
And did you do any analysis to identify how often 55% unimpaired flow at those locations actually achieves 55% unimpaired total delta outflow?
Again, the model doesn't have or produce a 55% delta outflow requirement, so it wasn't possible to do such an analysis.
Okay, but that analysis is what would be in a proposed Bay Delta plan, a 55% delta outflow requirement, correct?
Objection. Vegas do a proposed Bay Delta plan.
Sustained. Can you be more specific, Mr. Busher?
Mr. Walker, we've spent a significant amount of time this morning talking about a proposed Bay Delta plan that would have a 55% unimpaired flow requirement. Are you familiar with that proposal?
Generally, yes.
Okay. And what you just told me is that the analysis in alternative 4 does not give the information about total delta outflow, correct? Percentage of unimpaired flow.
Yes.
Okay. Is it your understanding that a 55% unimpaired flow proposed Bay Delta plan is measuring total delta outflow?
I'd say generally yes, but I can't point to a specific document or location, a recent document or location that I could say that I've seen that.
In terms of the alternative 4 analysis, did it include any variation in range, right, down to 45%, up to 65% of the unimpaired flow, or is it just fixed at 55?
It's fixed at 55.
You understand that the proposed updates to the Bay Delta plan would include a range around whatever the final unimpaired flow number is?
Generally, yes, that's my understanding.
The sites performed any analysis to determine where within that 45 to 65% range, whether water is available under those proposed regulatory schemes?
Other than the 55%, no.
And this is 55% of the various points that we've described, not 55% delta outflow that's in the alternative 4 analysis, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. You talked with Mr. Schutz a little bit about the VA analysis. Does that model include both VA flows and sites operations?
So there was two different models, the VA models, or actually 4 different models, but we took the difference between the VA models and the difference between the sites models as a calculated monthly average delta outflow and combined those results.
So let me try it differently. You testified on Friday, and I think again today, that there was not a model that existed that included both, right, 55% unimpaired flow and sites operations. And I'm trying to understand if the VA analysis is a model that includes VA flows and sites operations, in the same way that you described the lack of a model for the Bates Delta plan requirements.
There is not a model which includes both VA flow actions and sites reservoir operations, if that's what you're asking.
And then with respect to the alternative for analysis, your testimony cites to AHO 46, which is another one of those giant spreadsheets that I think you discussed briefly with Mr. Schutz. Can you just describe for me briefly where in AHO 46 or what parts of AHO 46 reflect the alternative for analysis? And if we want to put it on the screen, I'm happy to. I'm not sure it's visually informative.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what or do you mean a worksheet or a location in a worksheet?
Either one. I'm trying to understand what AHO 46 reflects with respect to that alternative for model.
So why don't we
put it on the screen?
Pull it up, please.
I'm sorry, are we the request for AHO 46?
Yes, please.
Great.
So all of the calculations and then thus the corresponding results are located on this first worksheet, which is WA_calc.
And is then, well, there's in what looks like, I don't know, cell M8, a 55% that's highlighted. Is that what does that mean?
Ms. Mullen, could you navigate the cursor over to cell M8 so I could see the equation just to make sure I remember correctly? So this is if I recall correctly, it's an input to basically check whether or ensure that the requirement is being met at this location.
When you say the requirement, that would be an unimpaired flow requirement?
Specifically the 55% on requirement. So how this was used is we'd either turn it on or off, basically. So you'd put a 0 or a 55 here. And that was just to kind of test the sensitivity of meeting the requirement at this location.
And do the two tabs that refer to the LTO contain the specific data and constraints and flow rules for those models?
Those are the modeling output for those two models. And I would say that the rock on LTO underscore UIF is specifically alternative 4 model results. And the rock on LTO, I believe, is the no action alternative results.
And when you say no action from the 2019 process?
Correct.
Okay. We've got a lot of alternatives and no actions. I just want to make sure we're trying to be clear on that. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Ms. Malone. I don't have any other questions about this document. Last, Mr. Walker, you mentioned several times that you engaged in post-processing of the alternative 4 model results. Can you describe what that entailed?
So it's taking the results from the alternative 4 model and performing all the associated checks at each of the points of analysis identified to determine whether water is available for appropriation to project at each of those locations relative to the results from the alternative 4 model.
Okay. And Mr. Walker, is it correct that based on all of the modeling, both the scenarios, sites offered, and sites use of the divisions tool, none of those results show that there is unappropriated water available in September?
So in our opinion, the only analysis that performs a straight answer to the question of unappropriated water is the face value analysis. And the face value analysis does not show water available in September. Although as Ms. Bizzoni discussed and alluded to, there's important things to consider when viewing the face value analysis, particularly the assumptions relative to storage water rate demands.
And I think this maybe, I think probably my last question here, a couple of questions. And I don't know, Mr. Walker, I'll ask you, but please feel free to answer, Ms. Bizzoni, if it's more appropriately addressed to you. Do you have an opinion about, well, let me start here. Your opinion is that there is water available, right? Kind of under all of these models and then taken together, correct?
Correct.
Do you have an opinion about well, is there a point at which water is available, but not enough of it to have a functional project?
Objection, vague.
Sustained, what do you mean by a functional? I'll start with that. What do you mean by a
Yeah,
functional?
so let me try this way, right? If all these results came back and they all showed that there were 10 acre feet of water available, right? Water would be available, but they would not be available, right, to operate the site's reservoir as designed. Is that fair?
I suppose so, but that would be up to the project participants, not to myself to determine.
So do either of you have an opinion about whether any of the modeling results show that there is insufficient water available, right? Despite it being technically available, there's just not enough of it for the project?
Objection, again, vague as to insufficient.
I think that's fair. Insufficient for what, Mr. Busher?
Let me try this. Can we look at sites 276, page 23, please, which is Mr. Walker's presentation and the results for the division's water availability analysis tool. So I appreciate that you did not endorse this tool or its use necessarily, but right, if we look at the bottom row here of the division's water availability tool with the post-processing, et cetera, it shows an annual average available acre feet of 25,000 acre feet, correct?
Correct.
So water is available, right, according to that result, just a limited amount, correct?
Yes.
Do either you, Mr. Walker, or you, Ms. Bizzoni, have an opinion as to whether, right, that limited amount would represent sufficient available water to construct the project?
I'm going to object as outside the scope of their testimony.
He gets to ask outside the scope of their testimony, so I'll allow it to the extent they have an opinion.
In my opinion, this does not provide an answer to water available. This is looking at a face value analysis and is considering potential appropriation after, or sorry, potential unappropriated water available after a 55% unimpaired flow scenario. And that's where we have a bit more concern about the results from this tool, that there's putting a unimpaired flow stream flow requirement along with the face value of water rights is trying to well, it brings the two questions together that we believe need to be answered separately. So this is unappropriated water and water available for appropriation at the same time. And so I don't believe that this 25,000 annual average is a number that we consider as water available.
So, and I appreciate that. I didn't mean to try to put that into your mouth at all. I'm curious as to, right, if that was the amount of water available, right? Do you have an opinion as to whether that is sufficient to approve, build, operate the project?
I think we would probably need to look at more of the annual numbers to see the volumes that are available in a given year, and then where those fall in sequences of demand. So of course is showing that it's about 17% and a max of 241,000. So there's a lot more to consider than just these averages that are presented in this summary when considering if the project would be viable. But I don't have a number in mind of when the project becomes no longer viable.
And is it fair then to say that there's a difference between availability and viability? You're just not offering an opinion on where that line is.
There may be, well, yes, there's a difference, and I do not have an opinion on how they relate.
I appreciate that. And then last, and I'm sorry, I have one last question, and then I actually will be done. Ms. Bizzoni, when you're referring to available water as like, right, the aggregate, the combination of the answer to the two questions we talked about, is there a difference between that and excess water in your mind?
when I'm talking about available water, I'm really thinking about more towards, we're no longer talking about full face value of water rights. So with that distinction, and I don't believe, other than in terms of whether the delta is in an excess condition, I do not have a definition for excess water.
So you do not use, right, those terms interchangeably, availability and excess.
No.
Do you have any sense of whether one is a subset of the other? And is there only excess water if there's water available, and then only some of that available water may be excess?
Sorry, I don't have I'm trying to, I think I understand your question, but I still don't have a definition that I would use for excess water. It's not a term. We're looking at water that's available for this project, and other than is the delta in an excess condition, I don't have a context for the term excess.
Right. Thank you again, Ms. Bizzoni, and thank you, Mr. Walker. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. I think it's probably going to be a good time to break for lunch, but at first I will try to get a sense here. Mr. Fisher, will you have questions for this panel?
Yes, approximately 10 minutes.
Great. And then I'm looking to the room here to see who I have. I think next would be oh, we went through this last week, so I think we have a good estimate. But that, Mr. Fisher, are you okay if we pick up after lunch with your cross?
Sounds great. Thank you.
And are there any other, Mr. Busher, did you have another procedural issue you wanted to raise?
I apologize if I missed this. I think we might have accidentally skipped the DWR Bureau State Water Contractor parties.
Oh, yeah, I think we did. Thanks.
Figured I'd flag them out since it just
they're not on
occurred
my list because they're not on, yeah. Well, let me check. Why don't we ask those questions? Do I have a representative from DWR? Do you have any questions for this panel? Mr. Soderlund.
Good morning, Eric Soderlund for DWR. No, and I'll just let you know that if we do, or if I do have questions, I will raise my hand and not let the proceeding proceed out of order.
Great, thank you. And I will look to Ms. Mandel-Rice. I see you on screen here. Do you have questions for these witnesses?
I do not have questions for these witnesses. Thank you.
And then I believe the Bureau, Ms. Alfenberger, are you on here?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I do not have questions, and I will also endeavor to make sure I'm paid attention to if we do have.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, with that, are there other issues? Mr. Hitchings, I see you're off mute. Is there anything else we need to? Well, maybe you just never went on mute, so that maybe.
No, I did come off mute. Thank you. I know we gave some estimates on Friday, but it would still be helpful to the extent people can update that. So we can be in touch with our next panel witnesses with a time estimate for later today. So I think South Delta had an estimate, and then I think you had mentioned maybe that there may be some state board staff questions, and I don't know about Mr. King and Mr. Ornbahn.
let's see, Mr. Reese, will you remind us what your estimate was?
I think my estimate was 20 minutes, but the most of my questions have been asked and mostly answered. So I'd say it's probably 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And then I have, I don't think there'll be a lot of questions from State Board, just if any, a few minutes. Mr. King had some questions submitted to me in writing, which I need to take a look at, but I don't think they were extensive. And Mr. Ornbaum, are you on the line? I don't think I see him here. No, so I don't know. But Mr. Ornbaum, I think is limited to about 20 minutes left in any case. So does that give you I think we're moving along pretty quickly and we'll be ready for the next panel this afternoon.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Anything else we should address before we break? I'll give us a full hour.
Mr. Hitchings, for the panel 6, is that 15, 20 minutes per witness like we've been doing for all 5 of them?
Yeah, I think that's about right. On average. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Anything else? All right, let's meet back at 1 o'clock. You will have to re-log into the Zoom and I will see all of you then.